intertwined.
That's right.
On one hand, you've got this detailed architecture for political and social control. The sources we're looking at call it the Project 2025 blueprint.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the other side, we're trying to distill the strategic responses, specifically nonviolent counter strategies designed to, well, neutralize it.
Exactly. The goal isn't just to react with outrage, which is understandable, but often paralyzing.
Right. We want to move beyond that into organized systemic action. That's the mission here.
Precisely. And to really grasp the challenge, we have to look at it as more than just politics. It's fundamentally about collective reality.
Collective reality. How so?
Well, the core idea we're using, drawn from the sources, is how these, let's call them engineered narratives, can create a kind of shared delusion. Sometimes it's even called a totalitarian psychosis.
Wow. That sounds intense.
It is. Psychiatrists have a term for a similar phenomenon on a smaller scale. Folie à deux, a shared madness. And the counterplan, the anti-2025 blueprint, if you will, involves deploying specific tools, cognitive, cybernetic, systemic tools, designed to actually break that manufactured reality.
Okay, so for you listening, our goal isn't to induce panic. Far from it. It's about understanding.
Keyword.
We're going to map out this blueprint for control, look at its specific enforcement mechanisms, and some of these details, particularly around due process and ICE policy, are quite chilling.
They are.
But then, crucially, we'll present the strategic countermandate. And this is practical stuff. It focuses on intellectual clarity through what the sources call cognitive self-mastery.
Mm-hmm. Separating emotion from fact.
Exactly. And then moving into action through fierce debate, not just angry shouting.
Yeah.
And injecting friction into the system using techniques of simple sabotage.
It's really about dissolving these systemic problems at their root, rather than just, applying conventional solutions, which often just create new problems down the line.
Okay, let's get into it. Section 1. The architecture of this engineered reality. Control, ideology, and that shared delusion concept.
Right.
So let's start with the vision-driving Project 2025. What our sources really hammer home is that this isn't your classic Republican limited government pitch. Not at all.
No, quite the opposite, actually. The sources describe a clear shift towards using the federal government as an active, even coercive force.
Coercive in what way? To achieve what?
The stated aim is to engineer a very specific social and moral outcome, primarily restoring what they've defined as the traditional heterosexual nuclear family as the absolute centerpiece of American life.
So that's the ideological core.
That's the core. But it's not just rhetoric. It's backed by very specific, concrete policy proposals designed to embed this ideology deep within the government's administrative structure, make it permanent.
And these policy goals are, well, they're transformative, aren't they? Targeting fundamental institutions.
Absolutely disruptive.
Yeah.
The plan includes things like abolishing the Department of Education entirely.
Abolishing it? Why?
Yes. The idea seems to be to shift control over curriculum significantly towards religious organizations, private entities, away from federal standards.
Okay, what else?
A nationwide ban on abortion is a major pillar. And then there's this really striking goal to formally define sex in all government language and policy only as biological male and female at birth.
Which effectively does what?
It effectively writes transgender and non-binary individuals out of official existence, at least as far as government documentation, recognition, and potentially rights are concerned.
Yeah.
Strategically, the larger goal underpinning all this is achieving immediate and total control over the levers of power right from day one of an administration.
How?
By seizing the executive branch, obviously, but then systematically dismantling what they call the administrative state. Essentially, the existing civil service and regulatory bodies.
To ensure compliance.
Complete bureaucratic compliance with the agenda. The plan involves preparing to staff thousands of political appointments, people ideologically aligned, making loyalty and compliance mandatory, not optional like it often is now.
And this vision, it doesn't just stop at the U.S. border, does it?
Not at all. It extends globally, quite aggressively. Foreign policy is slated for a rapid, very focused realignment.
Towards what?
China is explicitly identified as the major threat, not just economically, but militarily, ideologically. That becomes the central focus.
And what about international aid, things like USAID?
That's set for a radical overhaul. The plan demands immediate cuts to funding for anything labeled gender radicalism or, quote, progressive climate politics.
So redirecting funds.
Redirecting and cutting. The priority shifts entirely. It becomes promoting specific models of free market capitalism and cultural conservatism abroad. The aim is to institutionalize this specific ideology both at home and through U.S. influence globally.
Okay, so that's the structure, the what's. Now let's get into the how. The psychological foundation you mentioned, this idea of scaling up flayadu.
Right. This is crucial for understanding how such a radical plan can gain traction and feel, well, justified, even righteous to its supporters.
So, flayadu, shared psychotic disorder. Remind us what that means in this context.
It's essentially a delusion, a belief system that's out of touch with reality, being transmitted from a primary person or a core group.
Like the architects of the plan.
Potentially, yes, or a charismatic leader figure. And this delusion gets passed to a secondary group, the followers, the supporters. And for those inside that bubble, the belief feels, as the sources put it, absolutely solid, totally unquestionable.
What makes it so sticky, so transmissible?
The sources point to something deep, archetypal power. The primary's delusion isn't just presented as an opinion. It's often supercharged with this unshakable feeling of rightness and righteousness.
A moral certainty.
Exactly. A conviction presented as self-evident truth. And this moral certainty can be almost irresistible to the secondary group because it often taps into hidden anxieties, unspoken desires. It provides a quick, easy sense of belonging, purpose, and moral clarity in a confusing world.
Can you give us maybe a less political example, just to make the mechanism clear for everyone listening? How does this flayadu work in, say, a business or a group setting?
Sure. Think about maybe a high-pressure startup or even a cult-like corporate culture. You might have a founder, the primary figure, who is operating under this powerful delusion, maybe that they're a singular genius, that their untested product will change the world overnight, that normal rules don't apply to them.
Okay.
The employees, the secondary group, might have initial doubts, but their jobs, their status, maybe even their sense of identity become tied to this founder's vision, right? So gradually they start to internalize the delusion. It becomes their reality too.
And what happens when someone challenges it, like an investor pointing out flaws?
That's where the defense mechanism kicks in. They become incredibly defensive. They might say the challenger just doesn't get it, or lacks vision, or is actively trying to sabotage them. The belief remains solid, totally unquestionable to them, even if, from the outside, the whole thing looks like it's heading for disaster.
So challenging the belief feels like a personal attack.
Or even morally wrong, because you're not just questioning a fact, you're threatening their identity, their sense of righteousness, the very thing that holds their ego together in that context.
Got it. And this defensiveness, this resistance to facts, that sounds like fertile ground for propaganda.
Precisely. Edward Bernays, one of the pioneers of public relations, basically showed this decades ago. You don't necessarily need logical arguments to sway people en masse.
What do you need then?
You can steer a really complex system, a society full of people, towards a goal you've chosen by bypassing their rational minds altogether. You tap into those hidden unconscious desires, those primal emotions. Through language, symbols, engineered narratives, media manipulation, you replace the messy complexity of reality with simple, emotionally charged concepts. You effectively guide the human herd, as Bernays called it, through a kind of linguistic fog.
And that fog is illusion.
It's the foundation of it, yes.
Yeah.
The totalitarian psychosis. It ensures the blueprint, the plan, can be implemented without facing rigorous critical analysis from those caught within it.
Okay, let's bring this down from the abstract psychological level to concrete policy. Section 2. Policy and practice, dehumanization, and the erosion of due process.
Right, because this blueprint requires enforcement. It needs muscle. And the sources highlight how agencies like ICE become central, often operating with what's described as a disturbing lack of humanity.
How is that power being expanded or changed?
Well, one key mechanism is pushing enforcement down to local levels. Take the 287G program. We see it being signed into law in places like Nebraska.
What does 287G do?
It basically allows state troopers, sometimes after just a few weeks of training, to assist ICE in making arrests, to act essentially as immigration agents.
And the justification is always?
Public safety. The language is always about getting criminal, illegal aliens out of our state. It aims to normalize and localize this federal enforcement power, make it seem like a routine part of state policing.
But the actual enforcement actions described in the sources, They paint a different picture, don't they?
A very different picture, far removed from just targeting known criminals. The sources detail accounts of IC agents acting with a profound lack of humanity.
Such as?
There are reports, for instance, of an incident outside a school in Chicago that was described as deeply traumatizing for the children who witnessed it.
Just the presence of agents, or?
The manner of the operation, the atmosphere of fear created, and then there are even more alarming reports, like a federal agent allegedly threatening to shoot and arrest an ambulance driver who was trying to access an ICE facility in Portland during a medical call.
Threatening to shoot an ambulance driver.
That's what was reported. It suggests an overreach, an aggression that goes way beyond targeted enforcement. It points towards a campaign designed to instill widespread fear. Indiscriminate fear.
This is where that idea of fierce debate you mentioned earlier comes in, isn't it? Countering the language.
Absolutely. The counter strategy has to systematically dismantle the linguistic weapon of criminal alien. And you don't do that with more emotion necessarily. You do it with cold, hard, verifiable facts.
Like what? What's the key fact here?
The crucial statistic, the one that needs to be central to this debate, comes from the government's own data. 46% of people detained by ICE do not have a criminal record.
Almost half.
Almost half. Let that sink in. 46%. They have no criminal history. So when you hear the justification is purely about criminal aliens, this statistic exposes that as, well, not the full story.
So that 46% figure is like the antidote. It shifts the frame.
It has to be. It forces the conversation away from this manufactured panic about public safety and confronts the reality of what the sources call indiscriminate terror.
Terror is a strong word.
But the sources argue the operation is designed for mass psychological impact, an overreach of government power intended to terrorize communities.
And this has broader implications. Fears about where it leads.
Definitely. The sources relay deep concerns, particularly within African American communities. The fear is that if you normalize these kinds of broad, sweeping raids based on flimsy pretexts, well, who's next?
The fear is it won't stop with immigrants.
The fear is that eventually these tactics could be used to scoop up U.S. citizens, including African Americans, citing minor infractions or just based on appearance. There's a deep historical awareness of how fascist mechanisms progress. Once you start dehumanizing one group...
History shows it rarely stops there.
Exactly. That trajectory is what people are deeply worried about.
Okay, this connects directly to the constitutional questions, doesn't it? The erosion of fundamental rights. This feels like the ultimate test for that folia de deux system.
It is, because here the belief system actively rejects reality specifically, constitutional reality. The sources documented something truly stunning during the previous administration.
Which was?
The repeated unwillingness or inability of very high-ranking officials, people at the cabinet level, to simply affirm that due process, a cornerstone of the legal system, is guaranteed to every individual physically present in the country.
As mandated by the Fifth Amendment.
As clearly mandated by the Fifth Amendment, it's not ambiguous. No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. It doesn't say no citizen, it says no person.
And they wouldn't affirm that.
They repeatedly dodged, deflected, or outright refused to confirm that basic guarantee when asked specifically about non-citizens within U.S. borders.
How is that an example of the scaled-up delusion?
Because refusing to affirm a foundational, unambiguous constitutional right for one group, it's like saying the Constitution is optional. It signals that this fundamental right is no longer absolute, but conditional. It depends on who you are, as defined by the executive.
It serves as a warning. If that right is conditional for them, it could become conditional for anyone.
Precisely. It's the warning shot. The rules themselves are being replaced by the arbitrary will of this coercive state apparatus.
So, if the ideology is control, and the psychology is this shared delusion, how does it translate into actual physical force against cities or states that might resist?
Well, the Project 2025 blueprint is quite explicit about this. It includes what amounts to a war on cities and states.
Meaning?
It openly advocates using federal authority, potentially, including federal law enforcement or even the military, to impose the federal agenda on local governments.
Or?
The plan specifically calls for a complete and total federal takeover of Washington, D.C.'s local governance. And there's been talk, even from the top, about potentially extending this model to other cities perceived as problematic, like Memphis or Atlanta.
So overriding local democratic decisions.
Entirely. Using centralized federal power to force compliance, especially in places where local populations or governments might democratically resist the national agenda.
The sources use a really specific, kind of strange metaphor for this type of government action. The grunch. You mentioned it briefly, but we need to unpack that.
Yeah.
What on earth is the grunch?
Yeah, it's a striking term. In the source material, the grunge is presented as a metaphor for a soulless rhythmic entity.
Applied to the executive branch.
Yes. It's a metaphor for the executive branch acting like this grunge when operating under the Project 2025 blueprint. It signifies a mechanism of control defined by its dehumanizing rigidity, its lack of empathy, its purely procedural nature.
So it's not like a normal government responding to people.
Exactly. The metaphor highlights that it's acting less like a government accountable to democratic will and public good, and more like this automated, depersonalized, almost militarized corporate machine trying to impose control purely by force and regulation, completely dismissing local needs or democratic consent. It's control for control's sake, efficiency over humanity.
Wow. Okay, that's a bleak picture. Which brings us finally to the counter blueprint. Section 3. Cognitive and systemic dissolution. How to fight back.
Right. And this gets to the heart of that question you posed earlier, the one from the listener. How do you stop this without just protesting enraged?
Yeah, because the sources are pretty clear that enraged protest, while understandable, can be counterproductive, right?
It often is, because raw anger frequently triggers those psychological defense mechanisms in the opposition, the folia-do system we talked about. It makes them defensive, makes them dig in deeper, confirms their narrative that they're under attack by irrational forces.
So effective action, the fierce debate the sources call for, requires something else first.
It requires self-mastery. Specifically, mastering those paralyzing emotional responses like rage, panic, or despair.
And the tool for that is?
The operational tool recommended is Klischta. It's a technique for cognitive reframing.
Cognitive reframing,
Yeah.
like CBT.
It has similarities to cognitive behavioral therapy, but the sources present it as maybe more rigorous, more focused on systemic application. The core goal is to systematically, consciously separate the paralyzing emotion, the Klischta, from the objective facts of the situation.
Why is that separation so important?
Because the insight is that even when you feel completely overwhelmed by fear or shame or outrage, your underlying analytical ability, your rational mind, usually remains intact. Klischta is the key to accessing and activating that intact capability, even when emotions are screaming.
Okay, walk us through it. How does it work in practice? You mentioned columns.
Yes, the technique involves literally writing things down, separating them into two distinct columns.
Hold on.
Column 1 is objective reality. This has to be strictly factual, verifiable, stripped bare of any interpretation, feeling, judgment, or narrative. Just what happened.
Examples, like with the ICE situation.
Okay, so for the ICE example, federal data shows 46% of detainees lack a criminal record, or ICE agents conducted an operation near Elm Street School on Tuesday. Just the facts.
No, this is terrifying. No, this is fascism.
Not in column 1, those go in column 2.
Which is?
Column 2 is the emotional coloring, the Klischta. This is where you write down the subjective experience, the fear, the anger, the shame, the interpretations, the catastrophic thoughts, the self-labels.
So for the 46% statistic, the Klischta might be...
I am terrified. This proves the system is out of control. Anyone could be next, including me or my family. I feel helpless. This is the end of democracy. All those intense emotional reactions and interpretations.
And just writing them down side by side, that does something.
The power comes from seeing them clearly separated. When you see objective reality, 46% have no record next to Klischta, I am paralyzed by fear and feel helpless, you create a cognitive distance. You realize the emotional response in column 2 isn't required by the fact in column 1. The fact is the fact. The paralysis is interpretation, a Klischta.
You decouple the fact from the emotional overwhelm.
Exactly. You neutralize the paralyzing noise. And once that noise is quieter, your intact analytical mind, what the sources sometimes call the high variety mind, can look at column 1, the structural challenge, and ask logically, okay, given this fact, what is the strategic response? How can I use this information? What action can I take?
So you shift from being a victim of the emotion to an actor responding to the situation.
Precisely. From defensive, fear-driven reaction to intentional, logical, strategic action aimed at the system's weak points. That's the first pillar. Cognitive self-mastery through Klischta.
Okay, that leads into the second pillar you mentioned, leveraging different kinds of minds. Neurodiversity.
Yes. This is about recognizing that the very control systems we're discussing, like Project 2025, rely heavily on predictability, on conformity, on what we might call low-variety compliance.
Everyone following the same script.
Essentially, yes. And the sources highlight that certain cognitive styles, often grouped under the umbrella of neurodiversity, are naturally resistant to this kind of rigid control.
The sources specifically called out the time-bender temperament, often linked with ADHD traits. Why that one in particular?
Well, individuals with that kind of cognitive profile often exhibit an inherent resistance to monotony and routine. They tend to thrive on novelty, change, complexity. Crucially, they often possess a strong inclination towards questioning authority and conventional wisdom.
They don't just accept the status quo.
They often instinctively challenge it. They naturally push back against low-variety, repetitive, top-down systems. And the sources argue that when this inherent tendency, which can sometimes be challenging in conventional settings, is channeled constructively,
It becomes a strength.
it becomes potentially a superpower for justice, as one source puts it. This rebellious overcompensation against perceived tyranny transforms into a necessary adaptive lever against bureaucratic suffocation and control.
But hang on, isn't ADHD often associated with, well, difficultation? How does that translate into effective strategy rather than just, being unable to follow the plan?
That's a common misconception, focusing only on the challenges. The other side of that coin is often intense hyper-focus on things that are engaging, rapid pattern recognition, creativity, the ability to connect disparate ideas. This links directly to a core cybernetic principle, requisite variety.
Explain that. Requisite variety.
It's a fundamental law of systems control, from Ashby's law. It states that for a system to be stable, the number of states its control mechanism can attain its variety must be greater than or equal to the number of states in the system being controlled. Meaning, a simple control system cannot effectively manage a complex environment. The controller needs at least as much complexity or variety as the thing it's trying to control.
And Project 2025, like many large bureaucratic plans, is essentially a low-variety control system trying to manage a high-variety reality.
Exactly. It relies on predictable inputs, standardized procedures, rigid hierarchies. It's inherently vulnerable to unexpected complexity, novelty, and chaos.
So the kinetic mind, the high-variety neurodivergent mind,
Thrives in the very complexity that paralyzes the bureaucracy. It can pivot quickly, synthesize information rapidly, see connections others miss, and generate the novelty, the necessary chaos required to disrupt the predictable inertia of the control structure.
they act like a local universe problem solver.
Yes, injecting high variety into the low variety system, forcing it to stutter, to adapt, or even to break down. This ability is absolutely crucial for the practical application of the next pillar.
Which is pillar 2, systemic disruption through simple sabotage.
Right. This brings us to the direct action component of the counter mandate. And it's not about violence or loud protest. It's about subtle systemic friction.
Weaponized simple sabotage. This comes from an actual manual.
Yes. The sources draw this directly from a real World War II era manual created by the OSS, the forerunner to the CIA. It was designed for ordinary citizens in occupied territories to resist the Nazi regime nonviolently by disrupting administration and industry.
How does it work? Why is it effective against a system like the one Project 2025 envisions?
It's effective precisely because it uses the system's own weight and rigidity against itself. Remember, requisite variety. When a low-variety, rule-bound system faces unexpected complexity or friction, it grinds to a halt. Simple sabotage is the strategic injection of that friction.
But wait a minute. When people hear sabotage, they might think of breaking machines or something destructive. And simple sabotage sounds like just being lazy or incompetent at your job. How is this a serious strategy? Couldn't you just get fired?
That's the critical distinction. This isn't about being overtly defiant or destructive, which is easily punished. Simple sabotage, as outlined in the OSS manual, is designed to be deniable. It looks like incompetence or overzealousness or confusion or excessive diligence.
Called deniability.
Exactly. The actions are calibrated to seem like someone is trying to follow the rules just badly or too well. The goal isn't personal confrontation, it's inducing bureaucratic paralysis, creating drag, slowing the entire machine down. It relies on subtlety and exploiting the system's reliance on assumed cooperation and efficiency.
Okay, let's get specific. What are some of these tactics, drawn from the sources and the OSS manual, that civil servants or even citizens interacting with the bureaucracy could use? Let's start with exploiting the rules.
Right. First tactic, rigidity of rules. The manual advises, apply all regulations to the last letter. Insist on following every single rule, even outdated or nonsensical ones, regardless of common sense or efficiency. Demand written orders for everything, even routine verbal instructions.
Forcing supervisors to spend time writing things down.
Exactly. It creates bottlenecks, paralyzes quick decision-making. Second, delay and confusion. This involved tactics like consistently misunderstanding orders, ask endless, detailed, time-wasting questions about trivial aspects of instructions, feigning stupidity is literally recommended, or adopting a generally non-cooperative attitude that never quite crosses the line into open insubordination.
That's being difficult.
Strategically difficult, yes.
Yeah.
Then there's paperwork paralysis.
Ah, the bane of bureaucracy.
Precisely. Saboteurs are encouraged to fill out forms illegibly, so they have to be returned and redone. Start duplicate files for the same project or individual, wasting storage and creating confusion. Deliberately multiply the procedures and clearances required for instructions. Make a simple request, need approval from 5 different committees instead of 1.
Every extra signature, every unclear form adds up.
It creates cumulative drag. And finally, there's meeting disruption.
How do you sabotage a meeting subtly?
The manual suggests referring all possible matters, especially urgent ones, to large committees for further study and consideration, knowing this will cause delays. Bring up completely irrelevant issues early on to derail the agenda. Haggle endlessly over the precise wording of minutes, resolutions, or communications. Argue about comma placement, anything to slow things down and prevent decisions.
The overall strategic goal here isn't just to stop one specific thing, is it?
It's bigger than that. It's to create a constant and tangible drag across the entire administrative system.
What effect does that have?
It demoralizes the administrators who are pushing the agenda and rely on smooth, rapid implementation. It frustrates their timelines. If the system can't move quickly, if it keeps getting bogged down in its own procedures, the radical pace demanded by something like Project 2025 is blunted.
It buys time.
It buys critical time. Time for broader awareness to grow, time for legal challenges, time for political opposition to organize, time for those high-variety minds to develop more adaptive long-term solutions. It slows the velocity of implementation.
Okay, that's the practical resistance. Now let's zoom out again for the final section, Section 4. The cybernetic mandate, redefining reality and governance itself.
Right. To really dissolve these engineered realities and control systems in the long run, we need to understand the fundamental flaws in how large systems, especially governments, typically operate. This is where cybernetics, the science of control and communication in systems, comes in.
Thinkers like Stafford Beer.
Exactly. Beer's core critique, which resonates strongly with the sources here, is that traditional government often fails not necessarily because of bad intentions, but because it actively attenuates variety.
Attenuates variety, meaning it simplifies things too much.
Yes, it drastically reduces the complexity of the real world, the nation, the economy, society, using very crude methods and low-variety tools, many of which were designed long before computers could handle massive complexity.
Okay, the sources list 4 main ways government does this, creating systemic flaws. We need to unpack these for the listener. What's the first one?
The first major failure is relying on poor models. The mental maps, the assumptions the government uses about how the world works, how the economy functions, how people behave, are often incredibly simplistic, just poor representations of reality's true complexity.
And when the model doesn't match reality?
The parts of reality that don't fit the model, the excess variety, get ignored or cause unexpected problems. This forces the government to constantly create new departments, new regulations, new patches to handle the complexity the original model couldn't cope with, leading to bureaucratic bloat and inefficiency. Think of simplistic economic models leading to complex, unforeseen social consequences.
Okay, second failure point, time lags.
Yes. Government operates on rigid, arbitrary time cycles, quarterly reports, annual budgets, 5-year plans. It freezes reality, which is continuous and dynamic, into these static snapshots.
So the data is always old.
By the time information is collected, processed, aggregated according to these artificial time blocks, and finally analyzed, the reality it describes has already changed. Decisions are constantly being made based on outdated information. They're perpetually trying to solve yesterday's problem.
Third failure, aggregation. How does that contribute to the fog?
Aggregation is trying to build a complete picture of a complex system, like the national economy or public health, by adding up lots of oversimplified, often incompatible pieces of data from different departments or regions.
The jigsaw within a jigsaw, as one source put it.
Exactly. Because each piece of data has already been simplified and possibly distorted for administrative convenience, the final aggregated picture is often a blurry, confusing, or outright misleading representation of the actual situation on the ground. It leads to total confusion at the top, because the map just doesn't match the territory.
And the fourth failure feels particularly relevant today, using powerful new tools to run the old, flawed system.
It's a modern tragedy, really. We have incredible high-variety tools now, supercomputers, AI, vast data networks, but instead of using them to redesign government, to actually handle complexity
We
effectively.
could just automate the old processes.
Precisely. They are busily taking over exactly the old system, as Beer put it, using supercomputers to run the same old low-variety models and bureaucratic procedures, just faster. Sometimes making things worse by locking in the old inefficiencies with new technology. They optimize the flawed process instead of transforming it.
So the real goal of this counter project, the deeper cybernetic mandate, isn't just resisting specific policies. It's about as the source is called, government.
That's the ultimate aim, to envision and build a dynamic, viable system that has liberty as its output.
What would that look like?
It would require embracing complexity. It means designing systems with continuous, real-time, high-variety information flow, instant feedback loops, systems that can adapt constantly to changing reality. The goal shifts from solving problems after they blow up to designing systems that can inherently dissolve problems as they emerge through their own adaptability.
That's a radical shift in thinking about governance.
It is. It moves beyond mere resistance to proactive system design.
This connects to the deepest level the sources touch on, challenging the nature of reality itself. Information, experience, the logos.
Right. If we want to truly disrupt an engineered reality, we eventually have to grapple with the nature of reality itself. This brings in ideas from physics and philosophy, like John Wheeler's famous it from bit hypothesis.
The idea that the universe is fundamentally informational, that reality is, in essence, a message.
Yes, that the physical world emerges from underlying informational patterns or processes. If reality is information, then controlling the information, controlling the narrative becomes paramount.
And this links to those more, let's say, visionary experiences mentioned in the sources, like Terence McKenna's descriptions.
It does. McKenna talked about experiences often induced by psychedelics, where he felt he was tuning into a different channel of reality. He described encountering what he called the logos, a kind of living language, where information wasn't just abstract symbols, but visible, tangible, almost architectural structures of light and meaning.
Like seeing language.
Seeing and feeling language as a physical force, a more perfect logos, compared to our spoken or written word. He described intelligent entities communicating in colored language which condensed into these rotating machines.
What's the relevance of that to countering political control?
It suggests, metaphorically or perhaps literally, that the reality we normally inhabit, especially the politically engineered one, the folie à deux, might just be one narrow, low-variety channel of information. It implies that a much richer, higher variety, more comprehensive reality exists, but we're often tuned out from it.
But isn't this straying far from practical strategy?
Yeah.
Visions and logos.
Well, here's the fascinating paradox the sources point out, right at the heart of Western thought, the very foundation of our rational scientific worldview.
Descartes. I think, therefore I am.
Exactly. René Descartes, the father of modern rationalism, his major breakthroughs in philosophy and mathematics, the very bedrock of the scientific method, didn't come from slow, methodical, purely rational deduction.
How did they come?
According to his own accounts, they were catalyzed by a series of intense, vivid, decidedly non-rational dreams and visions he had over one night in 1619. He believed he was visited by the Spiritus Veritas, the spirit of truth, which revealed to him the foundations of a new, unified system of knowledge.
So rationalism itself was born from non-rational inspiration.
Profound, ecstatic, non-rational inputs gave him the entire systemic roadmap almost instantaneously. And the data actually bears this out. After these experiences, Descartes' rate of producing original, groundbreaking conceptual work increased by something like 340%. It wasn't gradual deduction. It was a systemic download, a revelation.
That's incredible, but what's the paradox?
The paradox is that the rational system born from this non-rational event is now constitutionally required, as the sources put it, to deny, edit out, or explain away the very kind of ecstatic, subjective, high-variety inputs that were necessary for its own creation. Because those inputs are messy. They're subjective, hard to replicate, They don't fit neatly into the clean, objective, methodological box that rationalism built for itself. So it sacrifices the messy, generative truth of its origins for the sake of methodological purity and